Welcome to part 2 of Call It Courage, our new Read Aloud series that we began with the part 1 not long ago. We were introduced to a young Polynesian boy named Mafatu, who, due to some very traumatic experiences in his youth, when he was just 3 and he and his mother got caught in a hurricane and he lost his mother, he is terrified of the sea despite living on an island surrounded by it all the time. We kind of found out some information that his family doesn't really care for him very much because of his fear in a tribe where they value courage. His father, Tavana Nui, doesn't say a thing when others make fun of him and mock him. His own step-siblings mock him. His own stepmother mocks him and treats him with scorn openly, which means she's just openly mean to him. The other villagers just kind of ignore him. The other kids taunt him. And he just dreams of a way where he can just get away from all of this. Now once more it was the beginning of the season of storms. Men scanned the skies anxiously, watching for the dreaded signs which might spell the destruction of their world. Soon the great bonito fish would be swimming beyond the reef, hundreds, even thousands of them, for they came each year at this time with the unfailing regularity of the tides. They were held to be the special property of young boys, since it was by killing them that a youth learned to kill the swordfish and tiger sharks, progressing from one stage to a higher. Every boy in the village sharpened his spear, tested the shaft, honed his shark knife. Every boy, that is, except Mafatu. Kana stopped one afternoon to watch Mafatu at work on his nets. Of all the youths his own age, Kana alone had been friendly. Sometimes he even stayed behind when the others were fishing to help the boy with his work. "The bonitos have begun to run, Mafatu," Kana said quietly. "Yes," the other returned, then fell silent. His fingers faltered as they flew among the sennit fibers of the net he was making. "My father brought back word from the reef today," Kana went on. "Already there are many bonitos out there. Tomorrow we boys will go after them. That's our job. It'll be fun, eh?" Mafatu's knuckles whitened. His ears pounded with the swift fury of the sea. "That will be fun, won't it?" Kana insisted, watching Mafatu closely. But the boy made no answer. Kana started to speak. He stopped, turned impatiently, and walked away. Mafatu wanted to cry out after him, "Wait, Kana, I'll go! I'll try!" But the words would not come. Kana had gone. Tomorrow he and all the other boys would be taking their canoes out beyond the reef. They would return at sunset, loaded down with bonitos, their faces happy, their shouts filling the dusk. Their fathers would say, "See what a fine fisherman is my son! He will be a chief one of these days." Only Tavana Nui would be silent, for his son would not have gone. That night a new moon rose above the edge of the sea, silvering the land with a bloom of magic. Wandering along the outer beach with Uri, Mafatu heard laughing voices and drew hastily into the black shadow of a pondanu tree. A group of boys were pulling their canoes above the high water mark, laying their plans for the next morning. Their voices were shrill with eagerness. "Tomorrow at daybreak," one was saying. "There'll be Timi and Tapu and Viri will be there." "Aye," another voice broke in. "It's work for us all. How else will we become fishermen and warriors? How else will we feed our families and keep the tribe alive?" "True," said another. "Hikaru is too poor. There are only the fish from the sea. A man must be fearless to provide food. We will all go. Every one of us." Mafatu, standing tense in the shadows, heard a scornful laugh. His heart contracted. "Not all of us will go," he heard Kana scoff. "Not Mafatu." "Yeah, he is afraid." Viri generously offered, "He makes good spears." "Ha! That's a woman's work. Mafatu is afraid of the sea. He will never be a warrior." Kana laughed again, and the scorn of his voice was like a spear thrust through Mafatu's heart. "Aye," Kana was saying, "I have tried to be friendly with him, but he is good only for making spears. Mafatu is a coward." Now, maybe you've had a personal experience like that, where someone that you trusted, someone that you thought was your friend, you found out they were talking negatively about you behind your back. You can imagine that heartache that Mafatu must be feeling. The one person on that island that was kind to him, he finds out is saying things like that about him. The boys disappeared down the moonlit beach. Their laughter floated back on the night air. Mafatu stood quite still. Kana had spoken. He had voiced once and for all the feelings of the tribe. Mafatu, Stoutheart, was a coward. He was the boy who was afraid. His hands were damp and cold. His nails dug into his palms. Suddenly a fierce resentment stormed through him. He knew in that instant what he must do. He must prove his courage to himself and to the others, or he could no longer live in their midst. He must face Moana the sea god, face him and conquer him. He must! The boy stood there as taut as a drawn arrow awaiting its release. Off to the south, somewhere there were other islands. He drew a deep breath. If he could win his way to a distant island, he could make a place for himself among strangers, and he would never return to Hikaru until he should have proven himself. He would come back with his head held high in pride, and he would hear his father say, "Here is my son, Stoutheart," a brave name for a brave boy. Standing there with clenched fists, Mafatu felt a smarting on his eyelids and shut his eyes tight and sank his teeth into his lower lip. Far off in the Himene house, the old ones were singing. Their voices filled the night with rich sound. They sang of long voyages in open canoes, of hunger and thirst and battle. They sang the deeds of heroes. The hair on the boy's damp forehead stirred. The long-drawn mutter of the reef sounded its note of warning in his ears. At his side, Uri touched his master's hand with a cold nose. Mafatu pulled the dog close. "We're going away, Uri," he whispered fiercely. "Off to the south, there are other islands." The outrigger canoes lay drawn up on the beach like long, slim fish. Silent as a shadow, the boy crossed the sand. His heart was hammering in his throat. Into the nearest canoe he flung 6 green drinking nuts, his fish spear, gave his paro a brave hitch around his waist. Then he picked up a paddle and called to Uri. The dog leapt into the bow. There was only Kiwi. Mafatu would miss his albatross. He scanned the dark sky for sight of the bird, then gave it up and turned away. The lagoon was untroubled as a mirror. Upon its black face the stars lay tracks of fire. The boy shoved off and climbed into the stern. Noiselessly he propelled the canoe forward, sending it half a length ahead with each thrust of his paddle. As he drew nearer to the barrier reef, the thunder of the surf increased. The old familiar dread of it struck at his stomach's pit and made him falter in his paddling. The voices of the old ones were fainter and fainter now in the distance. The reef thunder mounted, a long-drawn, hushed, yet mighty sound that seemed to have its being not in the air above, but in the very sea beneath. Out beyond lurked a terrifying world of water and wind. Out there lay everything most to be feared. The boy's hands tightened on his paddle. Behind him lay safety, security from the sea. What matter if they jeered? And for a second Mafatu almost turned back. But then in his mind he heard Kana's voice once more saying, "Mafatu is a coward." The canoe entered the race formed by the ebbing tide. It caught the small craft in its churn and swept it forward like a chip on a mill race. There was no turning back now. The boy was aware of a sudden whir and fury in the sky above, a beat of mighty wings. Startled, he glanced upward. There was Kiwi, his albatross. Mafatu's heart lifted. The bird circled slowly in the moonlight, its wings edged with silver. It hovered for a moment just over the bow of the canoe. Then it rose easily, lightly, in its effortless flight. Out through the passage in the reef, out through the passage into the open ocean. Mafatu gripped the steering paddle and followed. And that is where we will stop. Another short section for part 2. Things will get a little bit longer as we continue reading. If you're not really following what just happened there, Mafatu, in a very rash moment, decided all at once that he was going to run away from Hikaru. He's got just a little bit of those green drinking nuts for water, because ocean water, you can't survive on that. The salt water will dehydrate you faster than not drinking at all would. So he's got just a little bit of water, his spear and knife, the clothing around his waist, his bird, and his dog. And that's it. And he has taken off, very ill-equipped, out into the ocean not knowing exactly where he's going, not knowing exactly where a safe island might be. He's just going off to face his fear, and one way or another, he's not coming back until he conquers it. Hopefully you join us for part 3 of this adventure as we continue Call It Courage. Bye.